The lights, the cameras, the music, add it. The flashy concerts, conferences, celebrities, mix it. A dash of cultural relevance, 3 cups of grace, 4 quarts of prosperity, a little twisting of scripture. Oh, and don't forget to eliminate anything that can cause conviction or make the masses uncomfortable. Got it? Until out of the oven comes a platter of ideologies and philosophies that look more like the doctrine of demons rather than the gospel of Jesus. How did we get here? When did our sermons become mere messages of prosperity with a sprinkle of Jesus? When did religion become a mere set of rituals to achieve our heart's desire? When did we start tolerating sin, abusing grace, using it as a crutch to support disobedient hearts who have not learned how to submit to Christ's leadership? Don't you see? We have raised a generation of jellyback Christians who don't understand the basic principles of the faith they claim to possess or know the sacrifices calling requires of them. This is why some Christians are quick to flee at the sight of adversity or recount their convictions because someone disagreed with them on Twitter. In fact, we even find ourselves arguing on matters the Bible clearly speaks on. Is homosexuality a sin or not? Are there many roads to God or not? Can I still have sex with my boyfriend and be saved and not? When will we start to see that the Bible has the final say in our convictions and our doctrine cannot be shaped by mere opinions? Honestly, we ought to lament at the current state of the church. But before we point fingers, we must remember that this generation is a product of our lackadaisical attitude towards proper theology and sound doctrine, and the lies we fed the masses under the guise of divine instruction, like how we teach people that God is our servant, whose sole mission is to attend to our wishes. And then we wonder why there's no commitment in the church, and why people neglect his existence until they need his assistance. So, when an exam comes their way or adversity shows their face, they'll start going to church and reading the word. They may even fast and stop sinning in the process, but after they have received the answers to their prayers, they go right back to ignoring his rules and regulations. Or they completely ignore his counsel and choose to rely on their own intellect. Then after achieving it in their own wisdom, they come up and say, well, I just want to thank God. Please, what did God do for you? Why acknowledge him in public if you ignored him in private? The truth is, we have reduced God to an accessory we can put on and off as we please, or a side hustle that we pick up when our 9 to 5 isn't doing enough for us. These days, you can't even tell the difference between a Christian and an unbeliever. Was the sign, the healings, the wonders, or the works of Christ obsolete? When did our saltiness become tasteless? And this is the problem of the 21st century. We have forgotten that the gospel is the power of God to salvation. And so we have added so many chemicals and additives to Christ's message that it's lost its substance. And a void message is useless. So I think it's time for us to retrace our steps. If we really want to see the power of God in this generation, signs, wonders, and most importantly, the miracle of changed hearts who submit to Christ, we need to go back to the only message that can save, the gospel. No additives, no chemicals. It's time to go back to salvation by grace through faith alone, because you know that salvation is not a generational inheritance that your parents handed to you during conception. Know that God will not allow you into heaven because your mom's a prayer warrior. You go to church. You're a pastor's daughter or a good enough person. The only reason why God will let you into heaven's gates is because of Jesus, his sacrifice on the cross, and your relationship with him. And it takes humility to realize that you and all your striving will never be enough. Jesus' sacrifice is the only thing that will suffice for God. It's time for us to go back to the doctrine that states that we are dead to sin. So as Christians, we do not make a practice of sinning under the protection of grace. Grace gives us the stamina and courage to live out the life of Christ, not the license to continue in the sin he came to set us free from. It's time for us to go back to studying the words by ourselves. Day after day, night after night, giving heed to scripture and prayer. Yes, teachers are necessary and pastors are useful, but this Christian call requires personal and careful devotion, or else you'll be susceptible to errors. Lastly, it's time for us to become martyrs. A people who are willing to lay everything down, even their own lives, for the gospel. Are you willing to die for your faith? If they put a gun to your head and tell you to deny Christ or live, what would you say? A people who do not look at the world for their affirmation and validation, and a people who will always choose Jesus when offered the pleasures of the world, because we cannot continue to have one foot in the world and one foot with Christ. God calls for our complete devotion. And this was the faith that the early church was built on, that caused Stephen to speak even in the light of his impending death, and the apostles to go to unknown territories, boldly proclaiming the gospel to strangers. This is the faith that caused Peter and Paul to speak even in the midst of persecution and opposition. This is the early faith, the faith our faith is built on. But if we as a church believe that we are not ready for that kind of commitment, we have not fully understood the call of Christ or adequately counted the cost of following him. So let's retrace our steps. Let's go back to the simple gospel and bring this gospel to our churches, our campuses, and most importantly, our hearts. Because in only this simple gospel, we will see people who turn from darkness to light, from death to life, and from themselves to Christ. Thank you.